In the 18th century, probably half the population lived at subsistence or bare survival level. In the early 18th century, England suffered from gin drinking. It was cheap and it was sold everywhere as you did not need a license to sell it. Many people ruined their health by drinking gin, yet for many poor people, drinking gin was their only comfort. The situation improved after 1751, where a tax was imposed to gin.
In the 18th century, craftsmen and labourers lived in 2 or 3 rooms. Poorest people lived in 1 room. The furniture was very simple and plain.
However, despite the improvements in farming methods during the 18th century, food for ordinary people remained plain and monotonous. For them, meat was a luxury. They lived mainly on bread, butter, potatoes and tea.
During the 18th century, the poor law continued to operate. However, a law of 1,723 parishes to build workhouses to house the destitute. Still, conditions in the 18th century workhouses were generally less harsh than in the 19th century ones.
We know more about poverty in the 19th century than in previous ages because for the first time, people did accurate surveys and they made detailed descriptions of the lives of the poor. We also have photographs and they tell a harrowing story.
At the end of the 19th century, more than 25% of the population was living at or below subsistence level. Surveys indicated that around 10% were very poor and could not even afford basic necessities such as enough nourishing food. Between 15 and 20% had just enough money to live on.
If you had no income at all, you had to enter the workhouse. The workhouses were feared and hated by the poor. They are meant to be as unpleasant as possible to deter poor people from asking the state for help. Married couples were separated, and children over 7 were separated from their parents. The inmates were made to do hard work like breaking stones to make roads or breaking bones to make fertilizer.
The poor called the new workhouses bastilles. Do you know that, Megan? And they caused much bitterness. However, during the 19th century, workhouses gradually became more humane.
At the beginning of the 20th century, surveys showed that 25% of the population were living in poverty. They found that at least 15% were living at a subsistence level. They had just enough money for food, rent, fuel and clothes. They could not afford luxuries such as newspapers or public transport. About 10% were living in below subsistence level and could not afford an adequate diet.
Surveys found that the main cause of poverty was low wages. The main cause of extreme poverty was the loss of the main breadwinner. If dad was dead, ill or unemployed, it was a disaster. Mum might get a job, but women were paid much lower wages than men.
Surveys also found that poverty tended to go in a cycle. Workers might live in poverty when they were children, but things usually improved when they left work and found a job. However, when they married and had children, things would take a turn for the worse. Their wages might be enough to support a single man comfortably, but not enough to support a wife and children too. However, when the children grew old enough to work things would improve again. Finally, when he was old, a worker might find it hard to find work, except the most low-paid kind, and be driven into poverty again.
In 1909, a Liberal government was released. Yes!
That was so